Hello and welcome, everyone. ALMA is pleased to host this timely webinar presented by PACE Analytical. This webinar came about from a 7-question survey sent out to ALMA members in partnership with PACE Analytical. My name is Thad Gurley, and I'll be moderating today's webinar on hiring trends, what lab managers need to know. We'd like for our webinars to be interactive, so we urge you to submit your questions at any time during the webinar. Please use the question box on the GoToWebinar browser to submit questions. We will try to answer as many questions as possible, but if we run out of time during the question and answer session, I will forward any unanswered questions to the presenters. Additional resources for the webinar are located on the right side of your screen. The webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the ALMA website shortly following the webinar. So with that, I would like to introduce our speaker today, Jim Bredow, who is the General Manager at PACE Analytical Scientific Professional Services. Jim has been an active participant in developing the scientific staffing business for almost 20 years. He holds a bachelor's degree in chemistry from the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. After starting as a contract analytical chemist, Jim was appointed to his first leadership role as an on-site supervisor for a group of pharmaceutical scientists and responsible for monitoring staff performance and maintaining client relationships. Since 2010, he has moved through management, working under a variety of staffing models, including contract, vendor management system, and insourced outsourced. Jim's experience as a hiring manager working with recruiting in a high volume and fast-paced service business gives him a unique perspective on acquiring and managing scientific talent. Jim, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you, Thad, and it's nice to be here. And I guess I'd also like to start by saying thank you to ALMA for working with our team at PACE Analytical to gather the insights we're going to share with you today. You know, it's in these times we're in with, lots of canceled conferences and other gatherings that it's always great to have an opportunity to interact with others in the scientific community. And I certainly do appreciate this opportunity given to me today to have this short talk with all of you. Now, not to start with the obvious, but, we all know 2020 was a rough year. But what this is equated to is 57 million jobs in the U.S. and 59 million other jobs across Europe to be now considered at risk. And, not only is it those blue-collar service jobs, but we're seeing more and more white-collar positions being put into this at-risk category. And, the economic fallout, has come in forms we're probably all familiar with by now, including permanent layoffs, temporary furloughs, reductions in hours and pay, and really, truly, this impact has been felt in all industries and across the globe. And while certainly not immune, we have seen, a little less impact in the healthcare industry, including those not necessarily directly related to COVID goods and services, so maybe a little bit more resilience there, but still, pretty impacted nonetheless. But, beyond current positions, job plans and job growth were impacted too. Positions or requisitions were frozen or canceled outright. And, I've even seen some incidences of offers having to be rescinded somewhat last minute, based on the timing of those business impact assessments and the resulting fallout from it. Now, even without the impact of a pandemic, labs on any given day face a myriad of challenges. I'm sure everyone here knows, you have budget cuts, upheaval in supply chains, staffing shortages, but 2020 with the pandemic, has created that untold turmoil and a need for swift response. So, the question is for organizations that are now looking to hire is, how do you staff and select the right talent when the landscape is so rapidly evolving? So to answer this question, ALMA, in partnership with PACE Analytical, we conducted a survey back in December designed to discover insights from lab managers like you around how hiring practices have shifted, specifically in response to our unprecedented circumstances we're in. So the survey contains 7 questions, and you could probably say covered the typical flow, identifying important qualities in candidates, how is the position being classified, followed by those interviewing, onboarding, and then lastly, those retention steps. So by analyzing the responses, we hope to understand how these impacts shape trends that will continue to influence hiring practices in 2021 and beyond. So to kick things off, the first question was, what are the 3 most important qualities resources should have to complete projects and key tasks in your lab? Number 1 response was a willingness to be agile and flexible, followed by aptitude or competence, And third was actually a split between communication skills and attitude or social skills. Now, traditionally, you might think it's the technical skills that matter most. You have a need in your lab and you want to know how to get it done. Thinking back a little bit to my first interviews, I think, that probably was the think in the past. Some of my early interviews were probably 90 to 95% focused on the technical aspect of, what was my research, what did I know, what did I learn, those sort of things. Now, admittedly, those interviews were longer and longer in the past than I probably like to admit at this point. But I'm not trying to suggest that the move away from that and towards more of the non-technical aspect is anything new. But this past year has really kind of accelerated that trend and brought it to the forefront. Now, an important skill set or an appropriate skill set is important, especially for certain specialized or niche roles. But, we have found that when there's too much or exclusive focus on those technical skills, those are the jobs that are going to sit open longer when you're probably looking to keep things moving. Another thing to think about is, when this technical heavy approach is used, you may be setting up for negative impact either immediately or down the road. And I was recently having a conversation with one of my colleagues, and one statistic that kind of came up in our conversation that's very interesting is that 46% of jobs fail in the first 18 months. And of that 46%, 89% are due to that attitude, while only 11% are due to those technical skills not quite meeting the needs. And, without being able to have that face-to-face contact in the current environment, there is a greater need for flexibility and having strong communication skills. Now, the next question kind of following up on that was, what are the least important qualities? And the responses there were, number one was industry regulation experience, such as GMP, GLP, ISO, followed by years of work experience, and lastly, that instrument skill set. So looking at these numbers, they do complement the previous slide and again demonstrate that shift away from that more traditional technical think where that's where the focus was. What is that technical ability coming in the door? And in our experience, in general, it is easier to teach and fill gaps in those technical skills than to get a person to, work on improving their communication and flexibility. That just may be a part of their work style, how they communicate and manage their time, which in turn may be a part of their personality. So, not saying that those improvements can't be made, but it may require, much heavier investment and a longer path to get them, where they need to be successful in the role. So really in the end, it's the employees with that agility, flexibility, and good communication skills that are going to help you out in a bind and really come through for you when you need them the most. The next question that was asked was to look at those hiring practices. How have they changed? Not surprisingly, there's been fewer direct hires, and we're also seeing a shift to temporary staffing as well as outsourced services. And then just for clarification, when I talk about outsourced services, I'm referring to both outsourcing that's taking place on-site or completely outsourced to an off-site facility. So another thing we are seeing too a little bit is with temporary staff is also even some shorter contract terms in some instances. Now it's really just a sign of the budgetary times, when we're all being put under cost-cutting measures to maintain that bottom line. Now, as we talked about in the previous slide, how we're looking for that flexibility on that individual resource is important, but it certainly does carry forward on the larger scale too for the entire lab operation. And a lot of times, using these temporary and outsourcing services can provide that flexibility that's needed. And a lot of times it's easier to adjust staffing levels with those sources up or down. I know a lot of companies may operate under a headcount cap or an FTE cap. And using those services, oftentimes don't necessarily count against it. It's a budget expense and not counting towards those caps. So you can have that staff there to get work done for you. And oftentimes too, using those other services can fill a role quicker. I certainly know some client processes of ours, their processes is up to a couple of months, where a lot of times temporary staff and outsourcing services can fill those roles quicker. Now, if you do have to deal with those headcount caps, and if you kind of want to view those requisitions that you do have as a currency, obviously you want to spend that currency very carefully and put in the right roles. So, using temporary or outsourcing staff, you can use them to fill those routine roles. So you can let your FTEs and fill those recs with the more specialized or the bigger picture needs that you may have. Now, at the same time, as far as outsourcing is concerned, if a position must be specialized and you don't have any more of that headcount space, outsourcing can be a way to retain a person and consequently their knowledge longer, because a lot of times those outsourcing programs, it's tied to the duration of the project or might even be considered ongoing support, and they're not subject to those time limits that a more traditional contract position may be. So now that we know, how we're going to fill the role, the next thing to look at is, what does that interview process look like? And, not surprisingly, we're going heavy on the virtual, number one. And number two is, there are not having any site visits during that interview process. So the question, it really is this virtual world here to stay? Or is it just a temporary solution to deal with the current situation? And, I've read a lot of articles saying, virtual is the way, virtual is the future is now, that sort of a thing. But really we're probably somewhere, a little bit less than that. Certainly there will be some companies that will stay full or highly virtual in their processes, but we certainly do expect some reversion back to in-person interactions. But, we can debate about how quickly and at what ratio, where the dust will finally settle. But what we can say is that virtual is here to stay, and it is here to stay as a more acceptable option. It wasn't too long ago, thinking back to, just prior to the pandemic, 2019, when I would have interactions with our recruiting, maybe a client of ours if we're filling a contract position, and for some reason or another, a person couldn't make an in-person interview, and we had to go to a video conference or teleconference. Usually the reaction across the board was, oh geez, well, I guess if we have to, we'll settle for that if we have to. And it was really kind of viewed as that secondary, less desirable option. But if you think about it, with virtual, if flexibility and speed are key, there really are some advantages. If an interview cycle is, say, 2 to 3 meetings, I know some companies it's even more, but you have those 2 to 3, interview meetings involving recruiting, maybe HR, management, maybe a client if it's a contract position. Going virtual, you're really going to realize some efficiency gains, for that interview team as well as for the candidates by going that virtual route. However, one thing to consider too is, one piece you do lose with that virtual meeting is for the employer to have that ability to read that full body language, versus just looking at a person's, face on a screen. I'm sure, you've probably heard things over the years about, you want to look at their body language, can give you a lot more insight on them as a candidate as well. And then on the candidate side, one thing that you miss out with virtual is that lab tour. I see a lot of interest in candidates in that lab tour, and that's really something that I think has really accelerated over the years, where they ask, where I proactively get asked if a lab tour is going to be involved, or if I tell them ahead of time, they're really excited to hear that there is that involved. So that is something that I would say is of growing interest from candidates. And not only is that lab tour a chance, to make the candidates comfortable, maybe sell them on the position a little bit if it's somebody you're really excited about, but it's obviously that opportunity to continue to interview and assess them as a candidate. How do they react to what they're seeing? What questions do they ask? Just how engaged are they? Are they just kind of, moseying around and don't seem that interested? And another way to look at it too is, usually when you're giving that tour, you're out in the hallways or popping into a lab maybe, and you're in a little bit of a less formal setting than when you're sitting in an interview conference room. So that you might see the candidate maybe let their guard down a little bit being in that less formal setting, for better or worse, who knows, but that still might give you, some additional insight into how they are as a candidate. Now, obviously, one way to combat this is to set up a video tour, and some of our clients I've observed have done that, since didn't have one and then did create one. with the pandemic, and it certainly does help. May not be a replacement for the real thing, but it still is a good alternative because, again, you can still kind of, see what questions they ask, following up and get a sense of how engaged are they. So as we continue to follow the flow, we move from kind of that interviewing to the onboarding step. Again, top responses, going virtual, remote learning, but it is taking longer overall to go through that onboarding step, and we're needing to develop additional training tools. So really, what this and the slide you'll see next is kind of highlighting is that onboarding a new team member is an investment in time and in that person. In these times, that is certainly a challenge, but it is really more important than ever to help new hires build that connection to their team and to the company, when they're not on site every day interacting with others, and maybe more organically, building that link to their team and to the company. Really, and what the payout you'll get by investing in these is you're going to have a more stable workforce in the end. So as we saw in that previous slide, I mentioned how onboarding is taking longer, and so that's why I think the number one response here is more oversight needed. So by in person, we're not necessarily referring to having to set up socially distanced one-on-ones and meetup times and stuff like that, but we're really just talking about having to be more disciplined in scheduling your time, whether it's by you as a manager, other members of leadership, maybe there's a training group or whatever. Because, in these times when so many people are working off site, you can't just pop into someone's cube and do the casual check-in and see, hey, how's it going? What's up? What's new? That sort of a thing. You can't do that pop-in really in the current environment. So really what we're trying to say is, it just may take, a more disciplined and dedication, again, to help build that connection that is so important in these times. And, the final step is to look at, now that we have them, how are employees going to be retained in the current environment? And we've certainly seen that through the implementation of flexible work schedules, certain safety protocols being implemented, as well as developing that ability to work remotely. And by addressing these things, you're going to, and ensuring their ability to work, you're going to be able to safeguard that investment that we've been talking about. And I guess I'll say it one more time, but what we're really seeing is a beefing up of that relationship building and accessibility, because remote working, is here to stay in some fashion. Employees with kids at home are getting used to that work environment and are wanting to maintain that. You see employees asking to work non-standard hours, for those family reasons, or maybe from their own safety concerns about wanting to minimize the number of interactions they need to have on site. I know sometimes, those safety protocols come from, the company itself as far as setting up those, all staggered, start times, again, to minimize the number of people in the facility, at the same time. And, while it may be true or maybe more true in regulated industries, like GMP, the days of plopping a new hire in front of a computer and just kind of letting them be for 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever days, those are fading. Now, I do think that was a trend, again, that maybe does predate 2020 a little bit, but again, I think 2020 has really put that into the forefront and accelerated that trend of greater interaction. Another thing is this past year has brought greater investment in remote capabilities like VPN. And I think along with that is the realization that more, if not all staff, need that access. I think, prior to 2020, when it came to those virtual or remote access things, it was maybe a little more restricted. Sometimes it might have been restricted just to leadership or people of certain roles. For companies that use contract staff, maybe they weren't given access to any of those things. And I think what this survey in last year has taught us is that to really get your full efficiency, that needs to be at a wider level to really maximize the operations in these times. Excuse me. But failure to take part in this will lead to risk. Idle employees will feel neglected and start to worry about their job or their income. And you can really quickly undo that connection building that I've been mentioning in these other steps that's taken place up to that point. It doesn't really take a lot to undo that. So really, it's the adoption of technology and those flexible arrangements that really will go a long way to alleviate those concerns. So really, kind of in summary, the consensus is that 81% of talent professionals agree that virtual recruiting will continue post-COVID, and 70% of talent professionals say virtual recruiting will become the new standard. Now, I guess I'll throw in PACE's kind of take on that a little bit. Now, we certainly feel that some aspects of virtual recruiting will remain. One thing that we learned through this is that career fairs can happen and be successful in a virtual world. Again, prior to this, I think they were kind of viewed as having to go virtual. Again, kind of that less desirable fallback plan B. But I think for us going forward, it really will be an active tool instead of being viewed as that fallback plan. At the same time, with all the virtual talk, we know some candidates and clients are eager to get back and re-engage in those face-to-face interactions. Really, but the main thing now is that there is the flexibility to conduct, some, if not all of those steps virtually, and it will be done in a manner that is more widely accepted by everybody. It's really the technology and the adoption of it that has moved very quickly to make all of this a reality. So, just to, I guess, start wrapping things up a little bit on the short talk here, I did want to spend a few moments just to quickly mention, diversity and inclusion. It wasn't a part of the survey, so it wasn't a part of the report, and therefore, on the slides that I did just cover. However, if you look at other businesses and reports, it has repeatedly come up as a prominent initiative. HR, staffing groups, and recruiters are all responsible for bringing in a wider variety of candidates. So, combining this with what we've talked about before, we know that there are new challenges waiting, and it's really about, our ability to adapt, innovate, and find flexible solutions are really what will carry us into the future, on that positive trajectory. And I guess with that, I want to thank everybody for joining me in the short talk. I know we'll be getting to some questions soon, and again, I do appreciate it. And I do want to thank one more time. I want to thank PACE for giving me the opportunity and asking me to conduct this talk, and as well as I would like to thank ALMA once again for partnering with PACE to conduct this survey and have this platform to meet.
Jim, thanks for that wonderful presentation on hiring trends, what lab managers need to know. So we have time for 2 to 3 questions. So Jim, the first question I got from the question box was, with respect to the hiring practice, does this include internal hires and or transfers from company departments?
Yeah, I think internally it's still important. It depends how big of a change, I would say. You still, if it's a great change, you're still going to want to invest that. I mean, maybe there's a little bit more, built-in comfort, if you will, but you still need to really be building those connections. In these times with everything that's going on in the world, it doesn't take a whole lot for a person to feel disconnected. So, I would say, you can kind of just, can vary from situation to situation a little bit, but you still want to make sure, probably err on the side of connecting in interactions more than not.
Okay, great. So I got a comment question. So here at PACE National in Mount Juliet, Tennessee, we are only using FaceTime Zoom for out-of-state area interviews. So local interviews are in person. However, we are not giving lab tours. So it looks like some groups are doing in-person interviews, and that's surprising.
Yeah. I know it's heavily virtual. I do have some of our clients. We do have one area of one client that does prefer to do in-person interviews for local candidates, and it's kind of the same thing. You know, they aren't giving the tours. So yeah, it's not 100% absent, but I would say it's more the exception sort of a thing. And as long as you know have those, that was the client I was referring to earlier when I mentioned about how they did create a virtual tour. You know, they didn't have one at the start of the pandemic, and then later on they adopted one because they were, you know, kind of realizing that the importance of that tour. So yeah, it's not, you know, we're not 100% virtual everywhere, but you know, there are cases where it is, as long as you're doing it, you know, following the social distancing rules and whatnot. You know, you can still do it if you want.
Okay, great. So one other question. I've noticed that there's a drop in morale, but techs are resisting on moving to different opportunities simply because they believe the job market is bleak and they feel trapped. This isn't due to a poor work environment, but due to a lack of advancement potential. Is this due to a poor work environment or a lack of advancement potential?
Yeah, again, it's really about you know, keeping in touch with them. You know, really talking about those opportunities, really understanding, you know, where do those concerns come from. Yeah, I mean, understand, you know, in this environment, it's easy to you know, to get down and you know, have kind of that negative output or outlook, excuse me. So, you know, I would say it's again, just important to understand their you know, their reasoning and really just have that communication, you know, with them on those opportunities that may exist and get those concerns, you know, addressed.
All right. Well, thanks, Jim. That was really nice. So this brings us to the end of this webinar. We would like to remind you that this webinar will be available on the ALMA website and our YouTube channel. We would like to thank Jim Bredow for presenting today, and you, our audience, for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. Thanks again to Pace Analytical for collaborating with ALMA on this topic of hiring trend, what managers need to know. We are still in uncertain times with COVID-19 pandemic, but ALMA leadership looks forward to 2021, helping managers become better leaders. Be on the lookout for more information on ALMA's 2021 program during the next couple of months. For more information on our organization, please visit labmanager.org. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.